just let that pass. It's really my great pleasure to welcome everyone, and I see the numbers continuing to tick up to this new GCM talk on remittances, diaspora, and the Sustainable Development Goals. Only 20 years ago, at the beginning of this new millennium, the contribution of migrants to sustainable development. If we could go on mute, please. Thank you. At the beginning of this new millennium, the contribution of migrants to sustainable development was just starting to be observed, analysed, and understood. Today, 2 decades later, we can say that there is a general consensus that migrants' economic contribution, either through the remittances sent or the investments they make, is vital for the livelihoods of their families, communities, and countries of origin, and a critical component of national economies in most low and middle income countries. The most recent data are impressive. Last year, migrants sent home over $600 billion to low and middle income countries, far above all other development assistance inflows, and in many cases, foreign direct investment. At the same time, migrant saving in countries of destination is estimated to be around $500 billion. Years of research demonstrate that migrants are keen to invest back home if they can access the right information, trusted financial products, and adequate investment assistance. Many commitments have been taken by the international community over the last years in this field, in the 2030 Agenda, in the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration, in the Financing for Development framework, and in the G20's Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion, just to mention a few. But much more needs to be done if we are to realize the aspirations contained in these documents. In this respect, the network has established a dedicated work stream on maximizing the economic contribution of remittances and diasporas to sustainable development. And this is the work stream that is hosting you today. It is led by IFAD, IOM, and UNDP, part of our collective commitment in the network to bringing the system together, to ensuring that the full experience and expertise that we have throughout the United Nations is brought to bear in support of member states and other partners. And this workstream also contains many other members, including, for the first time, representatives from the private sector whose role is so key in this field. And I would like to thank everyone in the workstream, particularly co-leads, for their remarkable efforts in moving forward with this agenda. So it's in this context that I welcome you to today's GCM talk, during which we will seek to explore how, through stronger partnership with migrants and diaspora, and utilizing new technologies, combined with tailored financial products for migrants and their families, we can contribute to financing the funding gap for the SDGs by 2030. Digitalization and financial inclusion are the center of this year's campaign for the International Day of Family Remittances, observed every year, as you know, on the 16th of June. And it will also be a topic thoroughly addressed at the upcoming Global Forum on Remittances, Investment and Development, known by the tricky acronym GFRID. And this will take place in Nairobi on 14 to 16 June, so just around the corner. Furthermore, this September, heads of state and government will gather again at the United Nations headquarters in New York for the SDG Summit to review implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This summit will be a key point in which to present the progress made and the progress still to be made on a number of fronts to deliver on strengthening the links between the Global Compact for Migration and the SDGs, and particularly in this case, on how remittances and diaspora investment can contribute to the SDGs. It is in this spirit that the United Nations Network for Migration and IFAD jointly launched a call to commitment, requesting the support of UN entities, partners, and stakeholders to make and voice their commitments on how to maximize the impact of remittances and diaspora investment for the SDGs, and which I urge you all to join. This is also the focus of today's talk, which intends to pave the way towards the International Day of Family Remittances and put the first building blocks in place for the discussions at the GFRID Summit. I will stop there. My only remaining duty and pleasure is to introduce our opening speaker, Pedro de Vasconcelos, manager of the financing facility for remittances at IFAD and a wonderful partner to the network. Pedro will moderate the first panel, and I very much welcome all panelists to join us at this moment on the screen. Pedro, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I would like to thank you, Jonathan, for this clear and insightful remarks. This really provides us with a clear base to our next panel that we'll have the pleasure to moderate. As mentioned, I'm Pedro de Vasconcelos at the International Fund for Agricultural Development. Rural poverty and the aspect of remittances is key for us. For the last 20 years, I had the chance to work on the topic of migrant and diaspora contributions and see the evolutions in terms of awareness, action, and linkages with the development framework. So echoing your words, I wanted to say that a lot of things have changed indeed. Today, we see migrant contributions are not anymore, there's some errors and omissions in national accounts. They are now accepted to be more than just funds for consumption, but a lifeline addressing daily needs for millions of families home. Diaspora investors as well, they're also seen as a tremendous force for local economic development, particularly in rural areas. And their investments that remain in a way hidden in plain sight are often made where others investors don't invest. But in 2023, a lot remains to be done, echoing your words again. With the SDG and the 2030 SDG clock ticking, we are to work harder in making these contributions count more to families, communities, but also to the countries that receive them. The GCM, the SDG agenda, provides an initial roadmap. However, these roadmaps remain to be fully implemented, and I believe, and we all believe, I think, that it is the issue at stake. So as you mentioned, how can we address the advance on these aspects? We had the chance to jointly create this work stream. And today we will address some of the key questions that I mentioned and that you did as well. And for that purpose, we've put this special panel. And what a panel. So let me introduce you the people in it. We'll start with Dilip Rata, who for many, you know him, but he's the lead economist, migration and remittances, and head of Nomad at the World Bank, a colleague, a renowned expert with over this is my math, but two decades of expertise under his belt on the subject matter. Then we will have Veronica Stuttgart, founder and CEO of the International Association of Money Transfer Networks, that we call IMTN, another acronym that sometimes is difficult. But in a nutshell, she's the face of the money transfer industry. And thank you so much, Veronica, to join us today. After that, we will have Killian Clifford, Migrant Financial and Economic Empowerment, Labor Mobility and Social Inclusion of the International Organization for Migration. He also brings from his past life at GSMA a deep understanding on digitalization and its benefits to the ecosystem and remittance families, as well as diaspora. And last but not least, Paddy Siyanga Knudsen. She's the Vice President, Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism. This is another acronym that I have an issue with, so I don't know how to say it. So GRFDT. And she will, in a nutshell, bring the reality of migrants and diaspora groups to this discussion. So, colleague, this panel is an amuse-bouche, if I may say, as we will have the chance to continue it at the upcoming GFRID, the Global Forum in Nairobi, this coming June 14 and 16. And I really look forward to it. I know you will be there, so we will be able to continue on this. So without further ado, and in anticipation of our extensive discussion, I would like to ask Dilip to open the first round of questions. And as you saw, one of the key aspects that we like is to ask you is, why is the mobilization of diaspora resources to support remittance families and their communities back home so important? And if you can connect this with the 2030 agenda, it's a pretty vast aspect, but we would love to hear from you, Dilip, on how you see this. One last thing, we have 10 minutes each, 2 questions, so I'll be mindful of the time. Dilip, you have the floor.
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you, Jonathan. And thanks everyone for listening in. I guess the first message that we all should have known by now is that remittances are not small change anymore. In 2022, I think remittances would the new estimates would show that they are closer to $640 billion. We will come out with a new report around June 7, it looks like. By June 7, we will have new data for 2022 and for 2023 estimates as well. And at 640 billion flowing as remittances, officially recorded remittances to low and middle income countries, these flows are now larger than foreign direct investment flows that goes through all the multinational companies that we know of. And these flows are a multiple, more than 3 times the size of official aid, the total development aid going to developing countries. If you exclude China from the picture of the group of low and middle income countries, then remittances to the rest of the low and middle income countries, excluding China, are now larger than both foreign direct investment and official aid combined. And if I look at the future, next 20 years, I cannot imagine a scenario. I have tried, but I cannot imagine a scenario where remittances would decline. We saw that during COVID-19. We initially thought remittances would collapse simply because people won't be able to go to work, and also they cannot send money. And what we found now in hindsight is that remittances actually did not decline much. If at all, they increased a little bit. And in some countries like Latin America and the Caribbean, some regions, remittances continued to increase at the same pace as before. And new ways of sending money came up, digitization, as you heard about. Also, new sources of remittances or new impetus to sending remittances that enabled migrants to continue to send money also came up, in the sense that during COVID-19, migrants were included in cash transfer programs, employment support programs, in, of course, healthcare programs and vaccination programs, almost in all destination countries. And for once, we realized 2 things. One was that remittances, you can't keep them down. You can't keep them down. And the second was that if migrants are not safe and they are among us, then we are not safe. And I hope both these messages continue forever and for the time to come immediately, although we know that the latter issue of migrants, as soon as COVID is over, the anti-immigration sentiments have started again. So that is about remittances, the size of it. And of course, you will hear more from other colleagues. Just to say that in addition to sending remittances, people also save a lot migrants also save a lot in the destination countries where they are. And they are saving, we did an estimate about 10 years ago, it was about $500 billion a year. Most of that money is put in the form of either cash or in the form of low yielding, low interest rate bank deposits. So there is a huge potential to mobilize those funds through diaspora bonds, and I'll speak about that later. Now, I'm so glad to know that the development community realized the importance of remittances way back in 2015 when we were talking about sustainable development goals. And also in the Global Compact on Migration discussions, there is a very important section on remittances. And there are these 3 goals related to remittances and migration. 2 are remittance cost reduction, the target to reduce remittance cost to 3% by 2030. We are still averaging about double that level as we speak. So we have much to do on that. And the second is increasing the volume of remittances. And this time, it is not through the remittance channel, but the emphasis on increasing the volume of remittances comes from the means of implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. So the relevant indicator is SDG 17.2.3, where alongside foreign direct investment, alongside official development assistance, there is a clear recognition that remittances also provide a means of implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And who can argue against that? In Sri Lanka, remittance receiving families have children whose birth weight is higher than other families. In El Salvador, school-going children, the dropout rate is lower, school attendance is higher among children of the remittance receiving families. And you know that in many countries, remittances are 5, 6, 10 times the size of the largest foreign exchange earning item, whether it is an export item like oil in Mexico or Suez Canal revenue in Egypt. So we know the importance. So let me stop there, and I'll come back again for my 3 minutes more later. Thank you, Pedro.
Thank you, Dilip. Actually, you will have 4 minutes and 17 seconds, so you're good. You're good. Now let me pass. Thank you so much for this this setting. Actually, I think it's very useful in what we're trying to address today. So I would like us to move to Veronica, and on the same question, I wanted to so from the private sector perspective and referring to the aspect that Dilip just mentioned. Why is it important for the private sector, and does everything that we say match the private sector perspective? Could you give us your point of view on that as well, Veronica?
Thank you, Pedro, and thank you, and good day to everyone. From the private sector perspective, we understand clearly the ongoing digital transformation offers great potential to democratize the financial services. Digitalization can enhance financial inclusion, like it was mentioned before, by supporting the families and the migrants, especially by providing access, the much needed access that unbanked and underserved need. At the same time, the technology plays an important role, because technology can provide, with technology, we can provide consumers with better target services. We can lower the cost of remittances. There are different ways how we can promote this digitalization to achieve these goals. It could be through the digital payment solutions, online remittance services, mobile money, virtual wallets that we see more and more coming, digital identification. Also, it's important collaborative partnerships that enable the digital financial, the right environment for the digital financial inclusion. But one of the things that I think it's important to highlight, and from the private sector, we see very much, I would like to highlight that financial inclusion is not the goal. Financial inclusion is just an enabler for the other SDGs to help us to reduce and promote, to reduce poverty and to promote gender equality economically. So through the use of technology, digitalization can play a vital role for promoting financial inclusion for migrants and the family, facilitating affordable remittances, and fostering economic empowerment. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Wow, Veronica. Well, you will have another 8 minutes on credit. So thank you so much. And we hope to hear some examples for the second question. And thank you for creating that notion about the financial inclusion as a tool towards the SDGs. Actually, financial inclusion has been that. So if remittances can be a tool towards financial inclusion, it can therefore be connected with the same principle to the SDGs. Thank you so much. And that is a perfect transition now to ask Killian. Killian, in an effort to maximize the economic contributions to development of migrants and diaspora contributions, you notice that I keep saying migrants and diaspora contributions. We'll touch upon this. How can digitalization be leveraged to engage, promote financial inclusion and lower cost of remittance?
Thank you. My mic is on. Yeah, thank you, Pedro, and thanks to Dilip and Veronica before me. Yeah, I mean, digital is obviously, it's often presented as a panacea for everything in development and in payments and remittances. And it's true with respect to remittances and financial inclusion, digital can be. Digital has been responsible for the vast majority of gains seen in financial inclusion, as measured by Findex, for instance. The most recent data was out last year. And in Africa, as an example, those gains have largely been driven by mobile money, which Veronica mentioned. So what the benefit you have here with digital is, you have more flexible onboarding than you have with regular banking services. People with lesser forms of ID, even just a SIM card or a phone number can register for the most basic mobile money or most basic digital payment service. And then with the cheaper distribution you have, it makes it more profitable then for fintechs or for mobile money providers to onboard and serve these customers. So in this essence, the digitalization is driving an increase in financial inclusion globally, and digital financial inclusion especially. And as Dilip alluded to, we saw huge numbers increase during COVID, when providers, a mixture of reasons, really, the providers lowered their costs, sometimes made it free to kind of send small sums of money. Regulators worked with providers to allow for a loosening of know your customer regimes, to apply kind of risk-based approaches to opening tiered valued accounts or lower valued accounts. And so they're between the collaboration between the public sector and the private sector, we saw a big drive towards digitalization over COVID. And of course, coupled with migrant and diaspora's own ingenuity and leveraging off their savings, remittances kept up. And whilst not all of that digital uptake is stuck since COVID, quite a lot of it has. I mean, we had mobile money data out from GCM last month, which showed that there was 1.6 billion registered accounts in mobile money. That's from zero 15 years ago. So that's pretty impressive. And increasingly, we see that channel being used for remittances. And when I was covering remittances 4 or 5 years ago, mobile remittances, as an example, we were happy that was 1 billion or 1.5 billion. Can't forget what it was. Last year was 22 billion. So it's increasing exponentially. It's still a small percentage of overall remittances, but it's still, as a channel for a lower cost channel, we're seeing it increasing use. And that's because of the reasons I've alluded to, the distribution mechanism. Digital is constantly the cheapest remittance channel, as we see from the World Bank's remittance prices worldwide, and mobile money to mobile money remittances is cheaper still. And so the ubiquity of the mobile phone in developing countries means that migrants and their families have access to those lower cost channels, and it favors disadvantaged groups such as women, youth, people in rural areas, of course, and refugees and migrants themselves. And the financial inclusion gap for these groups is far lower than it is, say, for regular banking services or brick and mortar financial services, as we know. But, it's also important to strike a note that, not everyone can avail of these services. So, for instance, taking the migrant angle, some migrants can't avail themselves of legal pathways for migration. Many might be irregular migrants, and these groups may lack necessary documentation to open even the basic digital account. So cash and informal remittance channels may remain the only option for them. It may be the preferred channel. And we did a survey of economic and social remittances in Ethiopia last year, mostly to rural areas, it has to be said. looking at the corridors from Gulf states to Ethiopia, and we found like 57% of remittance receiving families in those areas receive those remittances informally, so off the books. So if, as Dilip alluded to, we're now looking at 648 billion in formal remittance flows in 2022. Informal flows remain huge, could remain a huge proportion of that on top again. So in terms of the financing for development opportunity and funding the SDG gaps, financial gaps, remittances and economic contributions are mainly massive opportunity in that sense. But on the receive side of things, digital exclusion can remain an issue for migrant families. Sometimes this receive programs help, but also it might be beyond that. So it may not have digital coverage, particularly in rural areas. If we say half of remittances go to rural areas, digital coverage there is often scant. It's not profitable really for mobile operators to operate there. Sometimes, even if there is coverage, the data cost can be limited. So there are, it's up to the private sector potentially to provide solutions for that, but maybe it's up for the public sector as well to kind of work with the private sector to promote those channels, maybe even subsidize some of the costs to sending to those particular areas. So whilst recognizing the opportunity of digital for remittances, we should maybe avoid being overly prescriptive about it. So I will stop there and hand over back to you, Pedro, on that particular.
Thank you, but I'm not avoiding being prescriptive, too over prescriptive. Prescriptive is fine, over is bad. Great. Thank you, and you will have another 4 minutes for your second question. Thank you so much. And there's a reason why I asked Patty actually to be at the last here. Is Patty, everybody that came before you, do they make sense? What I'm trying to ask by that is these points, do they resonate with the reality of migrants and diaspora investors? What is your take on this?
Pedro, thank you. And, thank you to the fellow panelists for leading the way in this. And I think that, the regulatory space, the engagement that, the space that, the whole space in which remittances are created is a very important space for us to talk about. So I thought that, I would start from there. Remittances start from a space where, you've got to have work, you've got to have access to some kind of a livelihood, or you have to have access to some kind of financing. So I think, does it make sense indeed for a lot of migrants and diaspora? So those who do send, those who are a part, a very important part of this chain, a lot of issues have to be dealt with in terms of decent work. And I think as governments, as regional mechanisms, as private sector seem to look to this clientele, I think what kind of remains limiting in this space is really making the match between remittances would only happen if we've got the space for us to generate, for people to actually make money wherever they are. So I think that's an important part of the puzzle that a lot of migrants and diaspora would feel is missing. And I think that's the emphasis that you sort of see also through the GCM in terms of the very specific actions and the very specific directives, or rather some suggestions on specific actions that states together with other partners could take. And you predominantly see that in other spaces, not just in GCM 20 and 19 and 20, but you also see it sort of spread throughout in other spaces as well. So I think that's a very important point for us to come in. And I think another place where it actually does make sense is that there is a strong link between remittances and the SDGs. And I think that for a long time we would argue maybe about this, but we're thankful for all the research that comes, both quantitative and qualitative. And I think that in a way, some of the objectives, for instance, that have been laid out in the document that has been shared and circulated around just begins to emphasize what the importance of migration is. And when we're talking about it as an accelerator of inclusive growth and so on, there we are really looking at what the level of financial remittances and how it can actually impact. We've also seen very practical examples, if you like, during the pandemic of what that has meant. And Dilip just mentioned that these numbers are never going to go down, right? And it's probably more likely that they go go up. And one would also say from a migrant and diaspora space, and those of us who work around research related to this, is that probably when we see numbers go down, it's because we haven't been able to capture it. So we're probably losing the flow of information, and not the fact that people will stop to send money to support what they really look at as personal SDGs. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about what that actually means in terms of personal SDGs. And these personal SDGs at the same time is where really migrants are really being considered as these key contributors to sustainable development, right? These are the agents of driving that kind of change that's really happening. School fees being paid, water access in certain parts, even just access to digital tools has also come about because of the fact that there's remittances. The fact that people have to be able to communicate has also meant that there's much more mobile phones that are heading in these particular areas. But then of course it never often matches. You can have a mobile phone but not have access to electricity. You can have a mobile phone but still be quite excluded from the market in terms of how you have to access, you have to be able to receive this fund. So indeed there is still this space of informal remittances and what that has meant. So cash to cash, money moving in envelopes, in airports, and between networks, between diaspora and migrant religious groups, where they're meeting in different settings, how these transfers are made. And let's just call them through the trust channels, right? And this, I think, is the part that really misses. What is really going through the trust channel that may not go through the official lines that we will see in the central banks? And I think this is the part that research is also chiming in and saying we probably need to pay attention to it. But at the same time, I think you've got a part that's feeling that, you've got to have diversity in everything, right? And in a lot of ways, the diaspora and migrants become very innovative. So when the path is not created, when the doors seem more closed, when the regulatory space in terms of the KYC requirements become much more stringent, it doesn't mean people will send less, or that doesn't mean that people will not send. What happens is that you just find another way. I was just thinking about village banking, and I don't know any of our, anybody who's listening out there who's probably heard about something called village banking. In East Africa, they call it SACCOS. We have so many different names. It's basically where you have a chain of people coming together, putting money in a pot, and that money continues to circulate. And you sort of saw a trend, particularly during COVID, and, I being one of those who was adventurous to try this, but actually you realize that a lot of remittances ended up going through these chains and money being transferred from trust networks in a way that could have been very difficult to capture, and probably were then not captured in more formal channels. But I also think what is important beyond this is thinking a little bit about going beyond the cost. What is really that transformative potential that we're looking at in terms of achieving the SDGs at that national level? So how do governments really leverage that? A big part of it is the engagement with the migrant community, engagement with the diaspora, because nothing is going to happen, I think, by assuming that migrants and diaspora would like to contribute much greater to the SDGs. They're well aware of some of these issues. They're well aware of the community needs. But how do you want to scale up that? And I think that's where the diaspora engagement policies really come in, to make not just the cost to go down, to make the market much more flexible, as one would say, for private sector to have more access. What's really happening around undocumented migrants and their exclusion from that system? What's really happening to those who have lower amounts that they have to send that don't make it through because the costs are high? But then also, I think what we've also seen, and very much related to the theme of the international of what we're commemorating today, but I think at the same time, what we kind of look at this call for commitment is how do you sort of increase that financial inclusion? And I think we've got to broaden the definitions, because we need to see that there's a broader perspective of migrants and diaspora in all their diversity, by the way, including third and fourth generation that have a very different social behavior in relation to remittances and what that means. How do governments want to attract remittances from this particular space? And of course, the topic for another day is how you want to invite investment. And sometimes these are going interchangeably in these policies. And I think that needs to be unpacked in its own right, in its own place. And interconnections need to be carefully handled so that particular directives are made towards to this. And maybe very lastly, at the same time, when we think about understanding the trends, I think it's also understanding what some of these limitations are. So I circle back again to kind of really looking at these trust-related issues, because, more volumes to go through official channels have a lot to do with what is happening on the diaspora engagement side, which we cannot ignore. We really need to understand the remitter a little bit beyond the lines that we see through central banks tracking. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty, for this, and also including some of the examples on that. I will give you then later. 2 minutes later on, because right now in 15 minutes we need to be done to pass on to the next panel. So really, and in brief, could I ask all the panelists in a round to bring some examples and suggestions to help the audience better visualize what is at stake and the road ahead? In particular, could you focus on what the examples on digital mechanisms or practices to engage and maximize migrants and diaspora's economic contributions to the sustainable development? So I will start in the same order. Dilip, if you don't mind. You have 4 minutes. I just stole 10 seconds from you. 4 minutes, please, if you don't mind, so our colleagues later on the member states can participate. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thanks, Pedro, and thanks to my fellow panelists. Let me highlight a few good things and a few bad things, all within 4 minutes. There was a question about measurement and whether we are able to capture flows going through informal channels or in kind. And the answer is partially yes, but I think the true size of remittances is quite a bit larger. We don't really know. And in that context, we have started through NOMAD, Global Knowledge Partnership on Migration and Development, and 45 countries coming together, all major remittance recipient and source countries coming together, IMF and Eurostat and World Bank all together. We have started something called RemitStart, which is the international working group to improve data on remittances. And among the 6 thematic aspects that we're looking into, one aspect is actually looking into estimating informal flows, and another group is looking into definition of remittances and how to broaden it to measure in-kind remittances as well. And there was one meeting in Brussels 2 weeks ago. There were about 60 people in the room, mostly from central banks of all these countries. And there'll be a second meeting in September, and perhaps by that time we'll have a draft, which would be for circulation for consultations. So there is some effort through RemitStart working group. More information is on NOMAD. On diaspora bonds, there was one successful case more recently of Nigeria raising $300 million through a diaspora bond. 2017, they raised $300 million and paid back 5 years later on time, perfectly on terms last year. So we have one example, but I think we could do better in terms of mobilizing hundreds of billions of dollars. My estimate is that we could easily mobilize $50 billion plus per year through diaspora bonds targeted to financing programs, development efforts that are liked by the country as well as the diaspora. It is key that diaspora buys into that. And so diaspora bond is a huge potential for development financing. And that would then take away the question about whether remittances are productively used or not. That question doesn't really apply very well to remittances because these are private flows, and whatever private people do mostly is okay for them. If you do otherwise, it's very difficult. So we have to keep that in mind. Diaspora bonds, on the other hand, are a direct way of raising development financing, specifically meant for productive purposes. There are other vehicles like future flow securitization of remittances or linking remittances to financial access like loans and consumer loans, housing loans. So that's basically on diaspora resource mobilization and making remittances productive. One aspect where I have become a little less enthusiastic of late, it has two parts to it. And this is endemic, it's in the system, and it would be difficult to get rid of. It is the problem that, yes, we know that financial inclusion helps. And if people don't have access to bank accounts, then it's difficult for them to use digital financial tools. But we also know that the cost of sending money through banks is the highest. So we have a problem. If there is more financial inclusion and people have more bank accounts, will costs go down? And the answer is no. That's because bankers don't like to deal with poor people or smaller amounts of money. It's too much transaction cost, too much risks. So I just had an example in India, in a rural part of India, and India prides itself as being on the frontiers of digital.
Dilip, I will ask you I know exactly the example that you're going to say. Can you do it briefly and conclude so the other ones can
yes.
And we have only 2 minutes left, so I need to have the other speakers as well.
Yes. So the cost of drawing money from our own account in rural India was 9.5%. So that is the example of financial inclusion versus dealing with banks. That leads to the final point, which is related to geopolitics and the recent last year's sanctions against Russia through the SWIFT system. That has undermined credibility of international payment systems that are programmable. So everything digital is programmable, and that would put some wrinkles on our thinking about interoperability and using digital means with profound implications for remittance costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilip. Veronica.
Yes, thank you. I was very interested in reading, some of the things that are on the chat, on the conversations that is going on there. And many of the examples, for example, of digitalization. With digitalization, there was a conversation about informality. With digitalization, we managed to capture some of that informality. And we thought that maybe, after all these, the pandemic, it was going to go back. We noticed that no, for example, it stayed. So that was a win, I would say, of digitalization. But on the other hand, yes, I agree with Patty. Informality is there, and these trusted funds are there, and there's a reason why they're there. People prefer sometimes to use it for different reasons. In some cases, they prefer, or in some cases, they have no option. So it's important also that when we digitalize all these transactions, we think properly what we are doing. We want to digitalize for doing good and not just digitalize the problem that we already have. So we have to also consider that. Some examples, quick examples, I will go about, instant payments. That's something that the customers wanted. There is, Brazil has been booming with the PIX, that was what everybody's talking about in fintechs. Transparency, digitalization help us to provide transparency to the sender of remittances. And there are a few more, but I'm conscious about the time. Thank you.
All the credit in time here will be given at the upcoming forum, so do not feel bad. Killian, again, mindful of the time, do you want to contribute with another example? You already mentioned some, but you want to be specific?
Yeah, very briefly. Thanks, Pedro.
Go ahead.
Certainly working with migrants and migrant families, we're not yet at the point where we're promoting central bank digital currencies, but we still have a role to promote digital awareness with them. We still have remittance families who have access to digital, they have mobile phones, but yet they're still receiving cash payments and losing 20% along the way. So there's work to do there around digital financial awareness and education. And we do integrate that into pre-departure training, but I think more could be done with the recipient families themselves. Second one I'd want to point out is the fact that, beyond remittances, you still need to engage migrants and diaspora to contribute. And they are more than just economic contributions. They have social capital, they have human capital, they can be philanthropists, they have cultural capital. And the secret of the sauce of all those contributions is engagements. And the engagement of diaspora and migrants can also be done digitally. iDiaspora is a prime example of that. It's like a digital town square, which connects different diaspora organizations, private sector, governments, and facilitates knowledge and exchange and dialogue between those groups, trying to empowering diasporas and migrants to be actors for development. And lastly, I just want to also mention, it's less on the digital side, but it's the Global Diaspora Policy Alliance that was launched last week. And that builds on of the Diaspora Summit, Global Diaspora Summit we had last year, focusing on Objective 19. And again, that's bringing a similar amount of stakeholders together to exchange best practice and diaspora engagements, such that we can leverage their various skills, their various contributions, including investment and remittances, but going beyond that, so they can be actors for development going forward. So, and relevant, of course, to the SDG Summit that comes up in September. So, with that, over to you, Pedro.
Thank you, Killian. Thank you on that. I would like to give the last word to Patty before we conclude with this panel. This is like sweet bitterness, so we don't have time, but
that's all right. Pedro, I think a lot of examples have been given, and I just wanted to talk about a little bit more about what we saw during COVID, right? The shocks, the surprises, and the volumes and the patterns, but also the adjustment. And I was just thinking how the digital space became very important, but at the same time, I mean, we have talked about also how it's been limiting. But I think the key there that you saw sort of in terms of the role of the social media in highlighting different, trends, patterns, but also options, is that they were point on the messaging, they were point on targeting who these different packages and different methods of remitting money home were targeted for. And I think that we can quite learn a lot from how social media has adapted in hard times where there's immobility, but at the same time in good times. So I think in terms of tools, there's many more. The big one that really stands is this mobile money transfer. I myself being a user, whether you're talking about being on the African continent with M-Pesa or even in Asia, for instance, for those who would have access to something like the WeChat wallet, that's been also a possibility. But I think, as my sister in the chat had said, Alice Nchube, traditional means cannot be taken out. So while we think digital, not all solutions are digital, I think we still really need to look at, handheld remittances and how do you make that safe? Could we understand a little bit more about how that space could be navigated and use innovation in that space? But then also a very last point maybe to make, looking at how, for instance, banks and, other national financial institutions may exclude others. I think we also need to do a little bit more around digital engagement, good data, and transnational engagement. And forums such as this, where we sit and we're exchanging, whether we're with diaspora, migrants, governments, and the interaction that we have with private sector are essentially important, whether we're researching, we're trying to unpack and really make a linkage to that social behavior in terms of remittances, so that indeed you can see volumes being influenced in other spaces, GRFDT, working together with many other partners. It goes beyond just, having a webinar series on, GCM 19 or 20, but it's everything, on GCM 1 on data, on GCM 14, where we're talking about consular, information rather, GCM 3, where we talk about information provision, but also particularly where we're advocating for regular pathways. This remains critically important. And I think these kind of conversations are important going forward. Otherwise, thanks again for giving me the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, colleagues, for that. And I've been checking the messages as well. And there's some, a million questions. We would need 3 days at least to continue this discussion. Happens that in less than a month, we're going to have 3 days to do that. Those that have not registered, we actually kind of suggest to come for this. So mindful of the time, I wanted to thank every single one of you for this insight, for this first discussion on this that we will be able to take further in the weeks to come in Nairobi. So thank you again for your participation and for being so brief in your interventions and direct. So I will give the floor back to my colleague, I believe David, for the next session and interventions from member states. Over.
Thank you very much, Pedro, and a great moderation. You are just in time. So I'm David Kodo. I am the Global Human Mobility Advisor at UNDP, based in New York, and I will moderate the next session, which is not really a session. It's more trying to put some order to the different intervention that we will have from the floor. Please, if you want to intervene, raise your hand so that we can have an order. I'm sorry, not everybody will be able to talk, but Pedro has already been doing lots of marketing for the Global Forum in 1 month in Nairobi, and there will be plenty of additional opportunities to talk. So first, I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Carla Maria Rodriguez Mancia from Guatemala. She's the permanent representative of Guatemala to the UN. And Ambassador, you have the floor, and I understand you will speak in Spanish, y me parece muy bien. Adelante.
Sí, muchas gracias, David. Voy a hablar en español y quiero saber si me escuchan bien con el micrófono.
La escuchamos perfectamente y tiene 3 minutos.
Muchas gracias. Yo quiero agradecerle a la red y a FIDA por esta invitación, que es muy importante para resaltar la relación entre migración, diáspora, remesas y desarrollo sostenible. También agradezco a los panelistas por sus presentaciones y contribuciones al diálogo que enriquecen el intercambio de información. Para mi país, Guatemala, las remesas familiares constituyen un factor esencial al desarrollo socioeconómico del país, incluyendo las comunidades de origen, porque representan un 19% del Producto Interno Bruto Nacional y continúan en ascenso, con una tasa de crecimiento del 20.3%, reafirmando los vínculos positivos que trae consigo la migración desde todos los ámbitos y principalmente su valiosa contribución a través de la fuerza laboral como aporte al crecimiento económico a nivel mundial. Las remesas superarán actualmente a las exportaciones dominantes en el comercio exterior. El reto medular en este proceso le corresponde a una reinversión efectiva de esas remesas, para lo cual las alianzas estratégicas con la banca y el sector privado deben ser consolidadas. Para ello es indispensable la implementación de estrategias sobre educación financiera que promuevan el ahorro y las inversiones productivas, permitiendo también la participación de la diáspora para mejorar las condiciones de vida dentro de sus comunidades. Es importante continuar promoviendo transferencias de remesas más rápidas, seguras y económicas, así como fomentar la inclusión financiera de las personas migrantes, en concordancia con el Objetivo 20 del Pacto Mundial para la Migración Segura, Ordenada y Regular, así como la reducción del costo del envío de remesas al 3% o menos, en línea con el Objetivo de Desarrollo Sostenible 10C. Valoramos estas alianzas y la promoción de la tecnología financiera denominada FinTech para facilitar el acceso a servicios financieros, incluyendo envío y recepción de remesas. Un reciente informe de la OIM detalla los principales destinos de las remesas en mi país, lo cual nos permite tener perspectivas únicas en los patrones de gasto. Creemos importante el tema de los datos y estadísticas que ayudan a una mejor toma de decisiones y elaboración de políticas públicas nacionales. 35% en Guatemala es para el consumo. 49.8% es para la inversión en construcción de vivienda, compra de inmuebles, reparación de la casa, ahorro y seguros. En último lugar figura la inversión social con 4.6% en salud y 3.4% para estudios. Estos datos no son determinantes ni demuestran una causalidad definitiva, pero sí sugieren que las personas están invirtiendo menos en salud y educación, favoreciendo la inversión económica y el consumo de productos básicos. También nos permite desglosar en qué sectores están destinados estos fondos, lo cual tendrá un efecto en los ODS relacionados: lucha contra la pobreza, contra la desigualdad, seguridad alimentaria y nutrición, infraestructura, vivienda, entre otros importantes. La búsqueda de oportunidades que por encima de todo velen por los derechos de la población migrante es prioritaria para Guatemala. Reconocemos el papel positivo y la contribución de los migrantes para el crecimiento inclusivo y el desarrollo sostenible en los países de origen, tránsito y destino. Me ha dado mucho gusto poder compartir estos avances, pero también indicar que tenemos muchos retos a nivel nacional, a nivel regional y en otras regiones del mundo, incluyendo África. Por eso aprovecho a a felicitar a África por su día y expresar toda nuestra solidaridad. Muchas gracias, David.
Muchas gracias, embajadora, por su excelente presentación de los puntos claves para Guatemala. I will give the floor now to another ambassador, the ambassador, the senior permanent representative to the UN of the Philippines, Ambassador Antonio Manuel Lagdameo. Over to you.
Thank you, and from New York, good morning to everyone. I wish to thank the UN Network on Migration and IFAD for this event, particularly to launch the International Day of Family Remittances campaign 2023 to 2024, and to work towards the upcoming Global Forum on Remittances, Investment and Development Summit 2023. Thank you as well to all the key discussants for their insightful presentations. I am very pleased to be here with my fellow IDFR and GCM champions, including, of course, my esteemed colleagues from Guatemala, Moldova, and Mexico, among others. For our discussions today, I wish to highlight the following 6 points. Number one, the mobilization of diaspora resources to support families and communities back home remains critically important. The resources of migrants and diaspora members, including remittances, support inclusive post-pandemic recovery. Remittances are an important source of finance for households and serve as a catalyst for economic activity and recovery in the receiving country. These remittances fund household private consumption, expenditure, and thus create a strong backward linkage to other sectors of the economy that produce goods and services to these households. Remittances also help fuel demand for goods and services and thus support production activities and promote job creation in the home country. Remittances deposited to local banks provide additional loanable funds, which may be made available for productive and investment endeavors. Number two, migration is a powerful driver of sustainable development. Migration is interrelated to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Migration can be an effective poverty reduction tool for migrants and their families, and can make significant contributions to development efforts in both countries of origin and destination. Migrants bring significant benefits in the form of skills, which strengthen the labor force, investment, and cultural diversity. Third, digitalization is an enabler of financial inclusion. Digital innovations transform the design and delivery of financial products and services, making it efficient and cost-effective to reach underserved market segments, including migrants and their families. To cite an example, the use of digital financial services, including technology-enabled remittances, builds a digital footprint for migrants and their family members, which can unlock access to a wider range of customized financial products and services, such as credit, insurance, and investment. Fourth, digitalization promotes faster and more affordable remittance transfers. Financial innovations such as electronic money increase the efficiency and reduce the cost of cross-border remittance transactions. For instance, local e-money issuers and foreign digital wallet providers can partner to facilitate cross-border remittance powered by blockchain technology. This can provide a more convenient way for Filipinos to send money to the Philippines electronically instead of physically going to remittance centers, queuing in line for hours and filling out printed forms. 5. On good examples of digital mechanisms and practices to engage and maximize migrants and diaspora's economic contributions to sustainable development, We have financial products and services that are specifically designed for migrants and their families. The Overseas Filipino Bank is created to cater to the financial needs and requirements of overseas Filipinos and deliver quality and efficient remittance services. This bank is the first digital bank in the Philippines. With these, overseas Filipinos are given convenient ways to invest, such as through the purchase of treasury bonds or access credit assistance under the Overseas Filipino Workers Reintegration Program. There are also efforts to develop enabling infrastructure and supporting mechanisms to address the digital divide and build inclusive digital finance ecosystems, including the digital identification system. And sixth, the Philippines adopts a collaborative approach to achieve the shared vision of financial inclusion through the National Strategy for Financial Inclusion 2022 to 2028. This strategy is a 6-year blueprint to accelerate financial inclusion towards broad-based growth and financial resilience. It recognizes that financial exclusion disproportionately affects underserved and unserved segments, which include women, youth, migrant workers, and their families, among others. One of the desired outcomes of the strategy is reduced disparities in financial inclusion based on certain demographic attributes, such as age and gender, which is being monitored through the strategy's monitoring and evaluation framework. Excellencies and colleagues, I look forward to seeing you all again when we commemorate the International Day of Family Remittances on June 16th. Until then, thank you very much.
Mr. Ambassador, thanks so much for presenting the recent experience from the Philippines. It's always good to hear from all your countries doing with diasporas and remittances. I will give the floor now to Jorge González Mayagoitia, who is the head of the Migration and Refugees Affairs in the Permanent Mission in Geneva. Over to you, Jorge.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you to all the previous speakers. I will make my interventions in Spanish if you allow me. El tema de este diálogo es de particular importancia para México. Alrededor del 10% de nuestra población, es decir, más de 11 millones de mexicanos, residen en el exterior y contribuyen al desarrollo económico de nuestro país a través de sus remesas, pero también de sus aportaciones sociales y culturales. México se ubica como segundo recipiendario más grande de remesas en el mundo, con flujos que oscilan en los 60,000 millones de dólares anuales. Incluso en los momentos más álgidos de la pandemia, este flujo de remesas se mantuvo relativamente constante, representando una línea de apoyo fundamental para familias y comunidades y también en los esfuerzos de recuperación económica. Por lo tanto, en este contexto, dadas estas condiciones que menciono, contar con políticas y programas para facilitar la participación de nuestra diáspora en el logro de los ODS, así como para promover la transferencia competitiva de sus remesas en línea con los objetivos 19 y 20 del Pacto Mundial, constituyen prioridades para México. Es en parte por esto que México se postuló para copresidir con Moldova la Mesa 3 del próximo Foro Mundial sobre Migración y Desarrollo, bajo la presidencia de Francia. Esta mesa está titulada Diásporas, actores para el desarrollo económico, social y cultural de las regiones. Es una mesa en la que estamos trabajando con el apoyo de expertos, principalmente con UNDP y con David, que modera esta sesión. Y quiero mencionar aquí que la orientación que estamos dando a esta discusión, que se tendrá próximamente, es precisamente algunos de los temas que se han tocado en este diálogo, incluyendo el uso de las nuevas tecnologías para empoderar a las diásporas. Sobre este tema en particular, quisiera compartir 3 buenas prácticas muy puntuales de México que destacan además la importancia de las alianzas. El primero es el programa Facilitación de Remesas. El año pasado, el Gobierno de México estableció un mecanismo público que tiene como propósito que los migrantes mexicanos en Estados Unidos puedan enviar remesas a México con mayor facilidad, de manera segura, con una comisión muy baja y en cuestión de segundos, con el uso de una aplicación de teléfono móvil que permite tener 2 cuentas bancarias y 2 tarjetas, una en dólares y otra en pesos mexicanos. Esta opción no solo facilita la transferencia de remesas, también promueve la inclusión financiera y el acceso a herramientas para el desarrollo sostenible. El segundo ejemplo, que justamente está en línea con un comentario de una de las panelistas previas, que se refería a que es muy importante facilitar el acceso al trabajo decente para que los migrantes puedan generar los ingresos necesarios para poder enviar remesas. Y este programa en específico se llama el Programa de Emprendimiento para Mujeres Mexicanas en el Exterior. Tiene por objetivo capacitar y dotar de herramientas tecnológicas, de aprendizaje y de creación de un negocio en el exterior a mujeres mexicanas emprendedoras para lograr su empoderamiento en los ámbitos económico y empresarial, lo que nosotros visualizamos como un beneficio para sus familias y también el logro de los ODS. Este programa es posible con el uso de la tecnología, ya que toda la capacitación se realiza a través de plataformas digitales. El último ejemplo, muy brevemente, es la Semana de Educación Financiera Integral para Mexicanos en el Exterior. Es una semana dedicada a la inclusión financiera en las representaciones de México en el exterior, o sea, consulados y embajadas, donde se ofrece asesoría, orientación, talleres y actividades en temas financieros a la comunidad mexicana en el exterior. Se lleva a cabo en formato híbrido y es resultado de una alianza multisectorial que incluye al Gobierno de México, instituciones financieras nacionales y locales y el sector privado. Y ahí concluiría mi intervención. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Jorge, y gracias también por recordar que México con Moldova cofacilitan las discusiones en el Foro Mundial sobre Migración y Desarrollo y la Mesa sobre Diásporas. Y ya que mencionó a Moldova, I'm going to give the floor to Ms. Violina Donu, who is the Deputy Head of the Diaspora Relations Bureau within the State Chancellery of the Republic of Moldova. Violina, over to you.
Thank you, David. Dear government representatives, participants, and audience, I am honored to participate today in this event, and thank you for the opportunity to expose Moldova's experience in this field. The Republic of Moldova remains in the top 20 of the world's most remittance-dependent countries, with around 1 million migrants abroad, and remittances which represent 50% of Moldova's GDP. Remittances on this scale are a main feature of Moldova's consumption-driven growth. The availability and visibility of this data has in many ways led to the discourse on the economic contributions of the diaspora being dominated by remittances. For our country and for other remittance-dependent countries in general, we can identify several challenges and milestones like access to remittances, diversifying the ways in which remittances are used, invested not just for household consumption, also the need of financial education for the population, for those who send the remittances and for those who receive it at home, and also promoting savings. But for many who live in remote areas, for example, accessing these remittances transfers may be not easy. Most of the formal access points may be concentrated in big cities, and those who live and work in the countryside, especially those involved in agriculture, often cannot afford to take enough time off work to access them. So some important tools here would be, for example, to manage remittance transfers and to strengthen the country's savings and credit associations. Enabling such type of associations to process international remittance transfers would enhance the competition among existing service providers and give rural families a reliable alternative to formal access points such as the cash-based money transfer operators. It also we also hope that channeling remittances through localized financial institutions can offer services tailored to the specific rural populations they serve, would inspire participants to save some of the money they receive and use it for income-generating activities and longer-term investments. So linking remittances with affordable financial services in this way for our country should allow development activities in the area to reach an even greater potential. However, the government is interested also in evidence-based information on the economic contributions of the Moldovan diaspora and labor migrants beyond remittances, such as investment, trade, tourism, or philanthropic activities. So therefore, the government is currently implementing several programs that are addressed not only to the remittances part in the Republic of Moldova, but also the contribution of migrants or diaspora to local development. For instance, as entrepreneurs and investors with an impact on improving the quality of life in the Republic of Moldova at local regional level and creating a healthy and efficient business ecosystem. For example, the institution that I represent, Diaspora Relations Bureau, launched a program called Diaspora Home Succeeds, DAR 1+3, a program which ensure the connection between local public authorities, diaspora, between a funder, a donor, and between the government. So in general, the program has its main objective to harness diaspora's human and financial potential in the socio-economic development of the local communities of the Republic of Moldova, and aims also to strengthen cooperation between the government, local public authorities, diaspora, and the development partners or a sponsor or donor. So giving to local public authorities the opportunity to encourage and stimulate project implementation jointly with diaspora associations. Also, there is another program implemented by another institution in my country. It is called the PARE 1+1, and it is intended for migrant workers, so they are first-degree relatives who want to invest in starting or expanding a business in the Republic of Moldova. The program has a rule, so 1+1 rule stipulates that every Moldovan leu, Moldovan currency, invested from remittances will be matched by 1 Moldovan leu from the program. And for those willing to extend their business and who are alumni of PARE 1+1 program, this program was updated to PARE 1+2. And the third good practice and good program is implemented also by another institution in my country, and it is advanced subsidies. These applications for advanced subsidy can be submitted by young farmers, women farmers, and returning migrants who have started up agricultural businesses in the Republic of Moldova. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Violina. Always good to hear from Moldova's experience. I will give the floor now to Portugal, to Mr. Duarte Valente, who is the first secretary at the Permanent Mission of Portugal in New York. Over to you.
Thank you so much, David. I hope you can hear me well, and happy to bring in another voice from New York. I'd like to start off by thanking the UN Migration Network and IFAD for putting together this talk. We're happy to take part in this discussion in advance of the GFIRD Summit in 2023, and looking forward to the campaign that's being launched towards the June 16th IDFR. I'd like to highlight a few of the reasons why we were drawn to this topic, and then maybe field in some questions to get in some discussions from our point of view here in New York. So some of the reasons why we feel that this is a key topic for us is I'd start off with our history. I mean, as you might know, Portugal is the country of outward and inward migration. We have a diaspora of 4 million, and at their peak, remittances totaled 10% of our GDP back in 1979, which equated to roughly 50% of total export value. Now, while this has come down to 1% of GDP in the 90s, they still remain relevant. And these figures and this history leave us well aware of the importance of remittances, not only for our own country, but also abroad, and for the importance of diaspora investment for sustainable development. We know that in more than 60 countries, remittances account for roughly or over 3% of GDP, and that many small and fragile states depend on them. And this is why, as many member states have already highlighted here before, We support the achievement of the relevant, not only SDGs, but also the GCM targets and towards the reduction of the average cost of remittances. Now, thankfully, and here appreciating the discussion that's being held in terms of the solutions that can be used to advance and achieve these goals, we also believe that regulated digital transactions can help that, and obviously can be an accelerator in promoting financial inclusion for migrants and their families, and especially for rural areas, in addressing bottlenecks. Internet payments, as has been referenced here already, can be twice as cheap as bank transfers or payment agents, and as a fast way of reducing the cost of remittances. Now, these are all the reasons summing up our history, our understanding of the connection to sustainable development that has been already here underlined, but also the importance of digitalization as an accelerator here, of why we feel this is an important issue to tackle and wish to remain engaged in this agenda. Now, looking here from New York and bearing in mind the loaded agenda that we have up to September, I'd be interested to know a little bit in how this campaign and the global forum will possibly feed up to the events that are taking place during High Level Week, the SDG Summit being one of them, but also the High Level Dialogue on Financing for Development. So how we can bring this topic to the fore in this event, and happy to engage other member states on that end. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Duarte Valente. We have had some interventions from member states. I would like to give the floor now also to a representative from the civil society. We don't have much time left, so really, if you can make short interventions. So I will give first the floor to Mr. Vladimir Pascual Revedo from the Rumiñahui Association. Over to you, Vladimir.
Muchas gracias, estimado Pedro. Simplemente felicitar por estas jornadas, y nos preocupa primeramente que las remesas muchas veces, estas remesas informales de parte de la banca pública a veces no son suficientemente apoyadas para evitar esas remesas informales. Luego también nosotros como inmigrantes aportamos a los ODS al número 5 que habla de género, ya que nuestras remesas ayuda a las mujeres, a las hijas, también a los ODS de pobreza y de hambre, de salud, que es el 3, de educación, que es el 4, la reducción también de las desigualdades, el 10. Nuestras remesas muchas veces, y aquí hacemos un llamado de atención a la academia, que no solo sirven para gastos, también sirven para el desarrollo, porque siempre nos dice que educación es gasto. No, educación es desarrollo. La comida es para también bienestar de la familia. Desde esa perspectiva creemos que deben ser tomadas en cuenta. También nos preocupa cómo la banca y las remesadoras hacen que el dinero llegue más pronto. Los bancos generalmente se demoran hasta 10 días en el caso de a Latinoamérica, tienen nuestras remesas en sus bancos, ¿no? Y también creemos que es importante que la remesa debe ser rápida, segura, pero también el cambio que utiliza la banca, y que allí se queda mucho de ese dinero, ¿no? De nuestro dinero como inmigrantes, las comisiones que utiliza, ¿no? Las comisiones y el cambio. Allí está. Países deben intervenir allí también para que ese dinero pues llegue a nuestra gente. Y también sugerimos que este dinero también se utilice para hacer un seguro de vida de nosotros los migrantes, ya que muchas veces cuando fallecen los migrantes, pues tenemos que estar recogiendo ayuda para apoyar al retorno de la persona fallecida, o cuando hay una crisis familiar. Esperemos que pudiera haber un seguro básico pequeño, ya que estamos permanentemente enviando dinero. Simplemente eso. Muchas gracias y felicitamos por esta jornada.
Muchas gracias, Vladimir. Muy buenos puntos, me parece. I would like to give the floor now to, and I'm sorry if I pronounce it very badly, Kirsty Kwarteng also from civil society. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And you pronounced it well, thank you. Thank you to the organizers, the moderators, and the speakers for this wonderful discussion. I just wanted to make a brief intervention about the role of second-generation diaspora and remittances. I myself am a second-generation Ghanaian, born and raised in the United States to two very wonderful Ghanaian immigrant parents, and I currently reside in the United Kingdom. And I just want everyone to remember that when we talk about diaspora communities, we must remember that diaspora communities are also intergenerational communities. It's not solely just the first generation migrants that are there. When they settle, they have children, and in some cases, those children also have children. In the case of the Ghanaian diaspora in the UK, they are very well into the third generation. And so there's the idea that second generation and subsequent generation are not very involved in the goings on of their countries of heritage, but that's very much not the case. The second generation, at least from the Ghanaian perspective, they are sending collective remittances. They may not be sending remittances to aunts and uncles and other relatives as their parents are doing, but they are very interested in sending collective remittances if there's a humanitarian crisis or if there's a fundraiser for a religious organization, things of that nature. Additionally, they're also very interested in investing in businesses. Second generation Ghanaians, they're buying land, they're buying property, they're supporting businesses in Ghana as their culture is very important to them. Some of them are buying cultural materials, some of them are paying, trying to learn their mother tongue, so they're paying tutors in Ghana to support them. So this is the way that they're sending money, sending remittances to invest in the Ghanaian economy. And I'm sure that this is not only happening in Ghana. I'm sure for all of the member states, the second generation diaspora communities that belong to the member states are also investing by sending remittances to their countries of heritage. So I'd really encourage everyone, as we continue to have these discussions, to make sure that we are also discussing the role of second generation and subsequent generation in remittance sending. Thank you.
Thanks, Kirsty. It's a very important point, and why we always insist that it's migrants and diasporas, so that we can also include the children of migrants. I think we have time just for one additional information because we are running almost late. So I will give the floor to Jibril Fall. Over to you, Jibril.
Thank you very much, David. And the West African country of the Gambia is a small country with big migration, about 2.2 million population, 200,000 being diaspora. I just wanted to make brief observations on remittances in the Gambia. In the year of COVID, Central Bank of the Gambia recorded $777 million as inflow. That's 2021. In 2022, it recorded 712 million. The important observation here is that many who migrated from informal remittances to formal remittances during COVID have remained within the formal remittances, since the number is very high at $712 million. Second observation is that in partnership with the government of the Gambia, the government of Switzerland, Central Bank of the Gambia, and GK Partners, which is the organization I lead, we're working on the most comprehensive study of remittances in the Gambia. The country has 8 regions. Right now, as we speak, we have field researchers talking to remittance receivers in 7 of the regions in the country. The 8th region is the diaspora, and we had already conducted primary research in this area, that is the remittance senders. We're pleased to say that we're looking forward to the forum in Nairobi, and we are thankful to IFAD and the UN Network for this opportunity, and we'll be sharing more information about the latest research on remittances in Gambia, covering informal remittances, remittances in kind, mobile remittances. And finally, the Central Bank of the Gambia has issued for the past 4 years, 5 years, 2 mobile money licenses. In the past 1 year, 1.5 years, it has issued 5 mobile wallet licenses, and there are about a dozen mobile wallet applications in the process, indicating the fact that it is recognizing the shifting pattern in remittances in the Gambia. Thank you very much, David.
Thanks, Jibril. We have one last intervention. I will give the floor to Monsieur Philippe Nanga du Cameroon, and then the floor back to Pedro to conclude this session. Monsieur Nanga, c'est à vous.
Merci. Mon nom c'est Philippe Nanga, je suis du Cameroun. Alors, déjà, merci pour cette rencontre qui nous donne beaucoup d'informations et qui nous conforte dans nos positions, montrant que les transferts de fonds de la diaspora sont nettement au-dessus, n'est-ce pas, de l'aide publique au développement. Ça, merci de nous confirmer cela. Alors, ma question, peut-être que ça m'a échappé dans les interventions. Je voudrais savoir, est-ce qu'on a pu établir le pourcentage qui représente, n'est-ce pas, les envois de fonds informels dans le montant global qu'on évalue en termes de transfert de fonds par la diaspora? C'est ça ma question. Peut-être que ça m'a échappé, mais je voudrais savoir, est-ce qu'on a pu établir un pourcentage? J'ai vu là qu'il y avait, le montant était évalué à 640 milliards de dollars, le montant de transfert de fonds. Est-ce que dans ce montant-là, il y a le transfert informel? Si oui, il représente quel pourcentage? Sinon, comment on fait? Est-ce qu'il n'est pas nécessaire de faire une étude pour essayer d'évaluer à peu près à combien
On vous a perdu, Monsieur Nanga, on ne vous entend plus. On ne vous entend plus. I think, unfortunately, so I will close this session, and I will give the floor back to Pedro. There was a question at the end, so maybe you have 20 seconds to respond to this. But thanks for all the people who participated, the great interventions from the member states and the civil society, and it's always good and very important to hear the views from the civil society. So, Pedro, over to you.
Thank you. And the question is noted, and I believe Dilip will be able to officially assess this. But from historically, what we know is around 10% was informal, but that varies from country to country. But I don't want to speak on behalf of Dilip right now, but this is a question for him. And maybe for the answer, the outcomes of the forum will help in that regard, as the World Bank also showcases on 7th of June the latest data. Colleagues, mindful again of the time, I would like to start thanking really the network, the co-organizers, David and Eric from UNDP, so much. Thank you so much for this, as well as Killian and Larissa from ION, and of course the colleagues at IFAD. We're very glad of the outcome of this first really work stream event. And of course, we want to thank all the panelists for their time, as well as member states. And finally, of course, the participants for coming in today and contribute. In closing today, in a few minutes, I would like to reiterate 2 timely events that I believe you will consider and participate, as well as contribute to. You already heard about that. The first one is the upcoming 8th edition of the GFRID, or the Global Forum, Remittances, Investment and Development, and its upcoming summit to be held at United Nations in Nairobi on this coming 14-16 June. It is a joint summit organized by the UN Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, OSA, the World Bank, and IFAD. And we also have a lot of technical partners joining in. This partner and observance are referenced in both the United Nations General Assembly resolution of the Global Compact on Safe, Regular, and Orderly Migration, and the proclamation of the International Day of Family Remittances. It brings together the public and private sector, as well as the civil society, in an effort to address the challenges and illustrate opportunities towards making both remittances and diaspora impact investments count more, and of course, support the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. All of the questions that were asked today will be addressed at the panel, so I can only invite you to really join. It is an in-person event, so if you can make it, we would suggest to be there, to be part of that. And the next and final item, second and last point that I wanted to showcase and referred earlier, is related to the upcoming observance of the International Day of Family Remittances this coming June. That will be a day to stop, reflect, advocate, and more importantly, recognize the involvement of over 1 billion people that either send or receive remittances. The ongoing decade campaign, Remittances and the SDGs, brings us the linkage between remittances towards the achievement of the SDGs by 2030, where some now say save the SDGs by 2030. And the references to it today were clear on that. We've come a long way from moving from what remittances were thought were and what they really are. So within that time frame of this 10 years when this was launched, more focus on biennial campaigns are run, notably the one that you heard about today, that brings specific opportunities to work in unison towards the overall SDG goals. The current campaign brings us the chance to promote the benefits, as you know, of digital remittances towards both financial inclusion and ultimately cost reduction. So it is aligned. This is a proven outcome, but all stakeholders need to work in unison to achieve it. Some of the things that we heard today, addressing the opportunities. I actually saw some frustrating comments that seem to come with frustration about, we all been talking for the last 20 years on this, how can we move forward? Because we need SDG 17. It is not just one part, one stakeholder that can do it. There's not a single signing of a paper that will do the trick. It is informed policies. They require more knowledge, starting with the differences between remittances and diaspora investment. Many make the confusion. It starts there. And we hope that the forum and these campaigns help in that regard. So for the IDFR campaign, I would like to conclude that we really call on member states, service providers, the civil society to make their voice heard and to showcase their practices in the framework of the ongoing campaign this year. These inputs will be invaluable if we are all to deliver as one and greatly contribute to the achievement of the SDGs. So please take action on June 16 and contribute with your views. So with that, I really want to thank everyone, the colleagues that participated and all the participants, and I look forward to see we look forward to see many of you at the upcoming global forum. Hear your notions and observe and examples for the campaign, and hopefully meet you all again at the summit of the SDGs this coming September. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Thanks, colleagues. Bye-bye.
Have a great afternoon or day, wherever you might be. Thanks.
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you, colleagues. Bye.